All right, well, thanks for spending your afternoon nap hour with me. Nice, you all got lunch, and now you want to learn about logs, I guess. Not exactly the world's most exciting topic. I kind of came up with it because it's one of the things that I always wish I had kind of a slide deck to hand off to people in my various jobs of like, this is how I've done it. You know, your mileage may vary, figure out kind of what the root cause is. So that's kind of the germ of the idea, and I appreciate you coming along for the ride to learn a little bit about it. So what we're going to do, we'll do some intro and background, just kind of like I'm talking about. Obviously, if you read the description, you know, I was at Jamf and I'm at Adigy. How do those support departments look at it? Kind of how did I get that background? Then we'll look at the background of Apple OS logging itself, where it was and how it is now, and that will help you get a better understanding of how that functions so that you can use that to your advantage. The tools that you need to use to get to that, because it is proprietary within the OS. And then that's not a typo. It's actually a topic about how do you help the support department of your MDM vendor or Apple better understand the issue that you're seeing in the data that you're presenting. Speaking from experience, that means all the difference in the world to finding a faster resolution. Then we'll talk about the debugging and streaming of logs, because there is a difference of being on a call versus submitting your logs in that ticket and looking at that with the support perspective of an MDM vendor. Then we'll talk about filtering that once you have all that data, because trust me, it's way too much to read all at once. Then we'll go over 2 real-world examples where I've used this to help a customer out or just better understand a process. And then we'll finish up with how do we take this feedback and logs and information that we have and get that to Apple so that we can improve the operating system and the different applications that we all use every day on these devices. And we'll have some time for Q&A. One thing I just want to, as a housekeeping, the PDF of this will be available on the resources, because there's going to be some examples in there. There's going to be code examples and different things you can run as a terminal command. And also, I'm going to try and remember to post this in the Slack session room, Slack room once we're done here. There'll be one that'll be PSU, I think it's -208 or what the terminology is, but it's out there. If you haven't already been looking at it, it's the Slack rooms for the rooms. I'll post the PDF there so you can get it a little bit earlier than the conference resources, which should be sometime next week or after that. So my background, I come from an EDU background. I started in K-12 when I graduated high school in 2011, and then I moved into a full-time role at University of Wisconsin-Green Bay making cardboard waste as a main byproduct. When we get new Macs, we had about 300 or 400, and we'd rotate those out throughout the year, each year with a kind of 3 or 4 year life cycle on them. So a lot of deploying labs and things like that. That's actually kind of how I got connected with Jamf, is basically using Jamf and Casper imaging back in the good old days of imaging a device. If you want to know if imaging is dead, I do believe that is a URL, imagingisdead.com. It'll tell you yes. But you know, that's kind of where my background comes from. That went to Jamf in 2016. That's a pre-COVID policy called Jamf Hands, where everybody on your first call would put their grubby mitts on you. I don't think they do that anymore. But was there through 2016 to late 2021. Yes, that is a real award that they used to give out to people that actually did more than their job, but it was termed as that. And then I've been at Adigy since 2022 as the Senior PM for MDM, DDM, OS updates, and Microsoft Conditional Access. So that's enough about me. What about the logging? Well, historically, if you go way, way back, everything was in var log, and it was in just a Unix file. And that system log file was just kind of a long list of everything that happened in chronological order. And everything had kind of a different format to it, and you could do a Command F and try and find what you're looking for, but it was a lot of reading and going through it. And when it comes to iOS, there wasn't really a file you could do that, and that wasn't exactly a great experience you'd want to scroll through on your phone. So one of the things that we used internally at Jamf was Lemon Jar, which actually went through. You'd plug in the phone with a USB cable, and you'd be able to then see the logging from the device. And then Unified System Logging came around. So we went from this, where we're looking at a log file. This is actually the one from my device now, today, which there's not that much in it because it's moved on and it's been put somewhere else. And if you want to go and check it out, you can. In the way, way back machine, it's long since dead, been replaced by what we're going to talk about today. but iOS console would give you an output in that linear format. So at WWDC 2016, Apple came forward and said, we got a better way of doing this. Going forward, we're going to have these unified logs. And this session is also, for some reason, no longer accessible. The video is no longer there. You have to go to the way back machine, but the slide deck is accessible. And how Apple presented it is, this is how we have today, and where we're going, well, it may look very similar, has a lot of differences in how you can tag and search and filter. So 2016 WWDC, they released that. And kind of in their presentation, as you'll find, they talk about how they wanted to standardize the format across the applications while also maximizing the information in a minimal footprint. Things to know about that is it's actually formatted at the readback. It's not formatted when it's stored. And the next slide we'll talk about where it's stored. And so that information is all being dumped there in this compressed binary format, and then when you go and look for something is when it's actually structured. And it's structured the same of timestamp, process, etc., as you'll see in some of the examples. Another thing that's important to understand about this and how it leads into your troubleshooting and root cause analysis is that these log messages have a life cycle, and they are limited, so they will roll over. There is some persistency to them, but they will roll. And then the other thing that Apple, always keeping with privacy, the personal identifying information is redacted from it. So you will see things like a private with 2 carets on the end, if it's something that's been redacted out of those logs. So where are these stored? Well, they are trace v3 files, and they're stored in var db diagnostics. Then there's another directory within that of var db diagnostics persist. That's where it's actually storing the historical logging information. About 50 to 55, your mileage may vary, sometimes are in there. My device, I think here, had 54 when I went and pulled it and looked at it, and they range in size from 5 to 10.5 megabytes. And so those are the historical logs for that device that you can go through, figure out, yep, okay, this is what was taking place 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes ago, etc., going back. One thing to keep note, and one thing that I personally use this view for, is when is it going to roll over? So when I'm working with a customer and we're trying to figure out how something is working or not, keeping an eye on how soon this rolls over. If you have something that's very verbose, that's doing a lot of login, like an OS update, it's going to roll sooner. Just something to keep in mind. So how are we going to look at this stuff? Where this information's in these files, I can't double click them. It's not like I'm just going to click on a .log file from the past. Well, there's 2 ways of doing that. We can use the console app, which is a GUI way of doing it, and we can use the log command line, which I actually know it was in a few other presentations already this week. And we'll get into examples of each of those. But what is actually logged? How verbose is this? Well, default messages are always logged and saved to disk. Info messages are shown when it's streaming, but it is not saved to disk unless you would go and specify. And debugging is not turned on. You can go and turn it on. We'll actually get into an example of that. And the error and fault messages are always logged and stored to disk. So, the pros and cons of each tool, because from a support perspective, I would use them for 2 different purposes, really. The console app with the GUI, you're limited to streaming on the device, meaning if you go and double-click console, it's not like using good old interactive command prompt on Windows with an SCCM device where you can go and look at everything in event log, event viewer from the past. This is just from when you opened it, going forward to what it's streaming. So typically, when I'm on the phone with a customer, that's not what I'm using. I'm actually using the log command, as we'll get into. But what I do use the console app for, and pretty much everybody that has been trained inside of the Jamf support and probably any other MDM support department, is using it to open the log archives, which we'll be looking at. One thing to keep in mind, and this is becoming less of an issue, but it's something that was a major pain point for us when I was in Jamf support pre-2021, before the Silicon devices really got out there. The Silicon devices, they go space shuttle status, the Intel devices go space shuttle status because they get really hot trying to generate and create that log. It's much cooler on Silicon. This is a meme that was made on November 6, 2019 and passed around widely in Jamf support, because you're just sitting there staring at it, and the problem that really came about with it is it would sit there, it'd stall out, you'd have spent 20 minutes waiting for it to load, close it, relaunch it, start again, because using the GUI, as you'll see, is a little bit better for trying to contextualize that. But the log command we can use show, which is going to actually show you the historical logs that where you'd be going and looking for a predicate or process like we'll talk about. Or we could use stream, and this is what I'll use when I'm on the phone with a customer, because we can say stream, and then what process am I looking for? And I can put that, and then maybe another terminal window running another stream right next to it, where I'd say I want to look at Mac Manage, which is like our self-service, and I want to look at Safari, or I want to look at Safari and company portal logs and different things from Microsoft when I'm doing like a conditional access thing, so I can see side by side what each of those are doing, but in their own view. And it's also fast and can be used in scripts. I'm not going to touch on any scripted uses of this because we got the examples to go through for root cause, but one of the things that my team and me have used this for is we had the MDM watchdog within Adigy that when we were having all the issues with MDM updates this time last year and prior, we put it together where it was going and saying log, show, and look at the MDM client, software update daemon, and the content manager and saying, am I caching an update? Do I have a 200 response? Did it fail? Is there something going on with the HTTP logging from that that can tell me it's broken? And then we'd go and relaunch those different agents to try and coax that back to life and get that MDM update going. That has since changed because with macOS 14.4, the ability to kickstart those has been deprecated. And we've since changed that tool to just make a sysdiagnose. That way we have some persistent logging from when we see that. That way we can work with Apple to submit a ticket for it. But there are ways that can be used in a scripted process to go and say, oh, I'm seeing that. I want to go and create a log, or I want to go and capture that and have that information accessible to you at a later date when you're not sitting there just watching it the whole time. So that's kind of a little bit of information about the tools. What about how do you want to use that with support? Obviously, they're looking at it from a different perspective than you are. Jamf support, and probably any other MDM vendor, has been historically based on the idea of on it. Objective, not working, investigated, tried. So when you have a ticket that comes in and you're trying to figure out what's wrong, whether maybe it's a VPP app or an OS update like we're going to look at, the objective is what do you want to do with that, which I know it sounds crazy because you're like, well, I want the thing to work. That's not hard to understand, but breaking it down that way, as my 8th grade math teacher said, there's many roads to grandma's house. Sometimes there is a better way of doing it than maybe what is broken. When it comes to the MDM and DDM stuff, not really, because that's the only path, but more of the scripted and packaging stuff. But still, it's a good framework to look at it through. And with that, all support has levels of escalations. It's just the nature of what happens when a business grows at scale like that. And the more information and context you can provide, the better, because that's going to help with that escalation as you need to get eyes on that. And really, it's how can you best state your case, as you'll find we'll go through and have that information so that everything is there to get that in front of the right person. And the last thing, and I know it's a weird bullet point, but be open and honest, because if I had $1 for every time someone said, yeah, I tried it on a network, trust me, I used it, it's good. Yeah, well, then we go through the logs and I go, yeah, I don't know, but that IP address kind of seems exactly like your internal network, not the hotspot you said you tried it on. And then rinse, repeat, we got to do it all over again. You'd be amazed. I don't know who does it, but people do it. They're out there. I had tickets. But really, help me, help you is what it boils down to. A lot of Jerry Maguire, actually, in this as we go through. Never seen the movie fully, just a lot of applicable clips to being in support. Kind of that frustrated feeling. So, debugging and streaming it. So there's a couple things to keep in mind when we're going to go and debug something. The logs aren't always in that persistent state for what we might need for a different app or process. So if you go and run sudo log config status and then specify the subsystem, and there will be a chart with all of the ones that I find pertinent that we use in just a little bit. Typically, the format is com.somevendor.app, com.apple.safari, etc. And it's going to tell you what status is the logging for that application in. If you want to turn that to a different level, you'd say log config mode and then give it the level of debug info whatever, and then specify again that setup. And it's going to put a plist in the library preferences subsystems for that. So here, if I go say, what's the status of Mac manage self-service, it's going to say it's at info in the persistent default. I go and run that command, boom, it's going to put down a plist within that directory and say, you're now in debug. If I read that back, it's going to say you're debug with a persistent default then. So now we know, okay, great, I can go ahead and replicate my issue. So that's great. That works on Mac OS, but there's no terminal, sadly, on iOS, iPadOS, or tvOS. How do you get those in debug? So this URL here, which is the developer Apple site bug reporting profiles and logs, has special profiles that you can put down on a device that will put it into that debugging mode for whatever respective service that profile's for. One thing of note, this is behind a paywall, but it's not. You can use any Apple ID. It doesn't need to be a developer account, but it is going to prompt you for a sign-in. I've had a number of tickets in the past where people, oh, I can't get in. It is asking for a sign-in. It's like, well, just sign in with your Apple ID, and you can go ahead and download that unique profile then for each of those logging components. The one that we're pretty much going to mostly care about is the managed configuration, and that's going to actually be the MDM process debugging for those devices, which we can turn on within the terminal, or we can use a profile for macOS and iOS, tvOS, macOS, or iPadOS is only through the profile there. Something to keep in mind on this is that these profiles will expire after X number of days. They don't just hang around forever and generate a bunch of logging. So like the managed clients, 14 days, and some of them like the Wi-Fi and network debugging is 31 days. So you'll need to reinstall if you've not used the device in a while for replication if it's a test device specifically. So real quick recap on what I use each of the apps for before we get into them. Console, limited to streaming on the device, in my opinion, for what we use from a support aspect, and obviously then opening log archives themselves, like we'll actually do, and then log command. It's going to give you the past and present, but it's not as visual, and in my opinion, a little bit harder to discern when you're trying to look at a big picture and zoom out like we're going to get that context, because you'd have to keep rerunning the command, rerun the command, rerun the command, and add and remove, which you can do, but it's just nicer with the GUI. So that's what the tools are going to do for you, but what are you actually going to submit to your vendor or Apple, or if you're working on a scenario with automated device enrollment, VPP, or any testing workflow where there's multiple steps or things get flushed, it's going to be a sysdiagnose, which if you go and just do sudo sysdiagnose, it's going to ask you a bunch of disclaimers, because typically this is what you'll send to Apple, and that's going to generate a log archive of all of those persistent logs that we were just looking at in that directory from your device, and put it into a nice archive along with a bunch of other pieces of information about your device that help give that holistic picture. There is also the collect command within the log binary that you could use to get a specific service if you really need to narrow it down. But I've found when we're working on a support ticket, it's usually not just one service that's having a problem. There's the network that's involved. There's the software update daemon. There's the asset manager. If you just collect the log using the log collect for just a service, you're not going to get the holistic picture that you really need, because when you're making a support ticket like that, and what was always my perspective is, I want to be on the phone one time, maybe two times, and get it solved as soon as possible. By the time it's getting to my level of escalation at the top of the food chain there, I don't want to have to do it again to replicate it. I want to have everything we might need, and the sysdiagnose really helps with that. So when you run that command, it's going to give you a zip file, a tar.gz, and if you uncompress that and open it, there's going to be the system underscore logs.log archive. And that is where all of those logs are collated into one component, and that's what we'll be using in just a few slides. How do you generate this? Well, on macOS, you could use terminal like was just shown, or you could use up, down, left, right. I've never used it successfully, personally, because there's a command prompt. I can type out what I want and specify where it goes. If you just hit return with sudo sysdiagnose, it's going to dump it to private var tmp. If you hit the up, down, left, right, it's going to do the same thing and dump it there. You can dump it to a specific file path like you might have seen in the previous screenshot of -f. That'll tell you where you want to save it. I usually just dump it to the desktop so it can get uploaded then. iOS, iPadOS, you can also do up, down, left, right. It vibrates, it buzzes. There's a better way. It's on the next slide. But a lot of my former coworkers at Jamf and I had a lot of fun times before we found out about the part that's on the next slide trying to get a device to do that. And then also imagine trying to explain that over the phone multiple times, like, no, you got to hit this, then this, then this, then this, and then it will generate it. And a lot of times you're working with a librarian in a school that they just have the device, but you got to talk to them to get it, and this is better with the next one. And then tvOS, you can hit the menu buttons, works great, and you can airdrop it. Yeah, question?
Any idea of tvOS? Does that work with the Apple Remote app, or do you have to have the physical?
I've always used the physical, repeat the question for the recording. Does it work with the remote app versus the physical remote? I've always used the physical remote. I've actually never tried with the remote app. I don't know if it would, because the volume down sends an IR signal, because it changes your TV as well. So I don't know if it's different. Something to try when I get back. So the way that I would actually do it on iOS, iPadOS is using assistive touch, which if you were a kid growing up in the late 2010s, you all know that from when your home button broke on your iPod Touch and your parents wouldn't fix it, so you had to use assisted touch. You can add analytics to that. So if you go in to assistive touch, you can say, I want to add analytics as a button. And as you'll see in the center animated GIF popping up, I'm very quickly clicking on analytics. It'll give you the upper screenshot there saying, I'm going to start getting analytics. And when it's done, it will say, I've got this successfully. You can go get it. Where do you go get that? If you hop in to the analytics and improvements, under there'll be analytics data, and you can search for sysdiagnose, and then you'll see the actual file with the timestamp of what you generated, and you can airdrop that to your device then, your Mac OS device. You can submit it on a ticket or open it up. So that's how you generate that. Let's take a look at how we're going to tear that apart and get the information out of it. So within console, you want to know the process. There's a time drop-down that you'll see, so you know the range, and frankly, the shorter the range of time you need to look at, the better, just for a performance and filtering standpoint. And really, you're looking at the processes in question and then peel back that filter. This is why I like Console app for doing this. Granted, it only works 50% of the time, but if you have a filter in for multiple things like you'll see, I can remove one and remove another, and in theory, if I have a line selected, something that I've picked out in the logging below, it should snap back in the history to that point. So as I remove filters, I can keep snapping back into that point and see, oh, okay, now the network, I can see an entry, 5 milliseconds before it. Oh, here's something that's related to what this error was for software update daemon. And that's why the GUI, to me, with it, especially from a support perspective, where we're trying to churn through them as fast as possible and actually get the root cause, is so important, because it gives you that context visually. Now, granted, it fails 50% of the time. You need to close and relaunch console and do it again, but it's invaluable when it works. For the log command, we'll need to know the time range we want to look at, because otherwise it's going to just be a huge, long command that comes back, like you'll see in a video example in just a second. And the predicate in question. What process are we looking for? So within the log command, you could look at 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, or one of my personal favorites is since last boot. So if you're having a replication for a VPP app install or something that you're looking at, and you know, okay, I have this device that I'm going to use for it, let's reboot it. Also, because IT crowd, have you tried turning it off and on again? Maybe it'll work. But also because then, you're starting from that point forward. This is where the replication took place. So I'm looking exactly at that. You could also say, I want to have it from a start date. So like here, starting at the session today or ending at the session today. Same thing for a range where you could have that. Also, a side note, I can see in the very last one there, it turned my grave symbol into a smart quote. I tried to go through wherever possible and fix that, but if you're copying and pasting that later from the recording, I'll try and fix it before I push the PDF out. That quote shouldn't be tilted. Keynote does that. So you're saying, okay, show me the money. Where's the logs? What do we got? So if you go into the log show command, let's look for something that's pretty simple. There's only going to be one entry, something that is common that you'd be looking for if you're trying to troubleshoot. Maybe when was this device misused, or something timeline, investigative, not troubleshooting necessarily. You'd say, okay, well, I want to look for the process that contains login window, and I want to look for an event message that's the did or session did login, meaning the device was unlocked, someone logged in that device, and what is about in the last 24 hours. So that's going to spit back. I only got one entry here, and that's my device when I unlocked it at 7:20 there, and great. And my user ID 502, which granted doesn't tell you my username in there, but you can deduce from that with other information that I logged in at 7:20 p.m. on that device then. So that's good. That's one example of it, but how could you use that for other things or get something that may be more useful? So you could also filter it to like a subsystem like sharing, and you want to know about AirDrop. Well, if you do just sharing, you're going to get everything related to sharing, not just things related to AirDrop. So there's also the category then of that. So you could say, I want to specify the category of AirDrop and all of the info about it. So here you would see all the different things of the device, noticing and seeing things around it, and all the information around that. Maybe you want to look for something that happened that was a little bit more nefarious. You could say, for the process of sudo, when a user's not in the sudoers file, and it would spit that back. In the same vein, if you want to look for when sudo was invoked and what command was run, you could say show predicate process of sudo and the event message of TTY, meaning that there was a command input and an authentication from the keyboard saying, yep, that's what took place. And then as you can see in the screenshot, maybe, maybe not, there's the command that was run then. What about other processes? What if you don't know the things that it's called or the bundle ID? Well, if you go into Activity Monitor and I'm looking for a process and I know it's mail, and I say process equals mail, last 24 hours, that's going to spit back everything about mail in the last 24 hours. Granted, in the video here, I'm showing 1 hour because otherwise it scrolls forever. But even there, I've got 13,000 some messages that come through, and that's everything that I would have then from mail in the last hour. Okay, that's great, but what about when I have a device that I don't have physical access to? We talked about sysdiagnose. So if I have a sysdiagnose archive on my desktop, and I've unzipped it, and I've got the .log archive file, can I look for something in that using the command line? Answer, yes. If I just give the path there, the predicate, and then the process, and I go through and run that, that's going to give me everything, and I know it's a lot of text, but right there I'm looking for the managed client daemon from an iOS device. We're actually going to look at an example of it up close with more of the text at the very end of the examples, but this would spit that back for you within that tool. So that's how you would look at it with a debugging perspective using the command line tool. What about streaming that log and watching it as it happens? So if you were to open up console app and have that process filtered in, or the command line like we were just doing with the predicate in question with a stream, you'd actually get that back. So like, for example, I open up console.app and I say software update daemon or maybe MDM client as well. That's going to show me everything on that. This is a screenshot from an archive, but if you were to go through and do that while the device was running, it's going to show you that as it's taking place. If you want to do that with the command line tool, you'd say stream like we were talking about. I'm going to specify I want to see debug level, and here I'm looking for com.attg.macmanage. And this example, this is where I get into what I was talking about with that layering of windows when I'm on a call with a customer. Because I want to be able to see multiple things at any given moment. So I would say, okay, I'm going to go open up MacManage while I'm filtering it, and I can see the log generating things about a Cloudflare integration that we don't have turned on, or if I go click on the ticketing item of this, we don't have ticketing set up within this sandbox instance, therefore it's throwing an error there, and it's set to highly debug what's going on. So everything I'm clicking on is generating something that I'm streaming as I do that live. Where that's really helpful is if I'm doing something like a Microsoft conditional access registration with a device, I can pull that up, see what's happening there, look at what Microsoft Authentication Library is doing from MacManage, look at what Company Portal's doing as that goes through, and look at what the single sign-on extension is doing, and I can have those splayed out so I can actually see in real time, and then maybe pause and go, oh, this might be where our root cause is, because I'm seeing it happen live in front of me. So what am I filtering for? These are the things that I have found to be useful. The good old APSD, There's a lot of messages related to it because it's everything with the push service, but sometimes there's a piece of information that's valuable in there. Content caching, sometimes we might have something with the asset cache that there's an issue there, and that's actually causing a download issue for MDM or DDM updates because it's hitting the cache and the copy on the cache is bad. OS installer, software update daemon, relevant for both, relevant always and forever because that daemon controls my life. It's the bane of my existence, but also it is the whole reason that people really use Mac management is to get those updates. So highly useful information there. One thing of note, MDM client and managed client on the macOS side, MDMD, Profile D on iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS. Networking, again, a little bit of differences there. User login, there's no user login window on iOS, iPadOS. And then when it comes to VPP apps, slight difference, but App Store daemon and the managed distribution daemon as well. So let's take a look at some real world examples then. One of them is something that's near and dear to my heart. I love iOS Cellular. It's a very interesting concept to me and how that functions on the eSIM and the private networks. But we had a customer that had some issues with deploying updates over that, so we'll get into that. And then we'll go to a DDM managed app install and what does that look like. And this is just a known good example so you can kind of see what does declarative look like versus some of the MDM communication you might have seen in the past. So, cellular example. Like I said, this customer had a number of iPads, a couple hundred out in the field throughout Denmark. And these iPads and iPhones are used for like pickup lockers and point of sale for a number of different purposes. But they never ever touch a Wi-Fi network because A, security, and B, a lot of the locations there isn't. If it's a pickup locker in the middle of a city center, just in the center of a town square, there's no network really there. It's probably got power and it's freestanding for the most part. So they want to deploy that down. One thing to keep in mind here, we'll compare from the UI. Here I have 5G auto and data mode standard. There are 3 data modes that you can have with an iOS. Low data, where it's actually going to restrict some of those items. Standard, which will just work like it always has. And then there's also now high data for if you're on 5G, allow more data. Something that could play into the example here. So this customer has these declarative updates. They've got a couple hundred devices, and they want to push that out to 20 or 30 of them and test it. So they go ahead, they push it out, nothing happens. They see that the declaration was made. They see that the device acknowledged it. They can see that it's pending on the device, but nothing's actually happening. It's just kind of sitting there. They see it queued up, they got the notification there's an update, yeah, it'll be done at a later date, yada, yada, yada. But it didn't actually do anything. So they're just sitting there, patiently waiting, looking at what's going to happen. Is the device actually going to do anything? They let a couple days go past, and then they make a support ticket because they're like, what the heck, this doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, I know exactly what we need to do. Well, actually, I don't. I just know where there's going to be information relevant to this because in all reality, no one knows everything or where it is. We just kind of know where to find information. So I figured something's going to be logged about this. No one's asked about it because I've never had this issue before with any of the other customers that use cellular here in the US. And I had an inclination because every time that I've been to Europe, there's always, people have data caps on a lot of their lines versus we have unlimited on a lot of stuff. So I thought maybe something's playing into that, but that's weird. They would be getting a notification of something, they hit their cap, or something would be limited somewhere. But no, it says their plan's unlimited. That's what their vendor for their cellular tells them too. So on we go to the investigation. So I say, okay, let's look for everything having to do with software update daemon. So I go open up that sysdiagnose from that log archive file. And I say, okay, software update D, what do we got? Well, I get 13,900 messages, and I start scrolling through it. Oh, I should point out, this log I gathered on my device as an example of known good, because I know I could make it go through first, and then I was going to compare it to what they had on their devices that were not doing it. So this is my device here in the US on Tello, which is a T-Mobile mobile network virtual operator, and it went through and it worked just fine. So let's dig in and find out why that is. So I filter for software update daemon. It has 1,390 messages. I'm scrolling, I'm reading, and to quote Patrick, this is taking too long. I want the warm now. I want to be warm now. I don't want to keep looking through this. So this is where the beauty of having the GUI and the more wide filtering and be able to adapt it immediately comes in. I'm saying, okay, there's got to be something about cellular related to this. I don't know exactly what the text is going to be verbatim, but there's something in there. I know I've seen it in the past. Let's go and look for that. So sure enough, I get that. I pull that down, and one of the entries, lo and behold, is that MA download option allows cellular 1, meaning yes. So on my example here, I know that when I go and download iOS 17.13.1 or 17.3.1 with this DDM command, the device goes and gets it, and it starts downloading it, installs it like nothing even happened. Doesn't even care between the networks. So I go, okay, that's great. And then if I zoom out and I pull that filter off, I can then see later on the mobile asset daemon right after that, because it's snapped back and I could scroll down a few lines. Yep, there's the download actually taking place after the software update daemon says I can go ahead and do this. Great. Then, of course, I can confirm in the logs, software updates, 181 megabytes, cool. I downloaded it, it's on there, I can see it installing, and the declaration's going to go through. And, of course, I made it past due at midnight, so then my device becomes useless after that. But I got the logs, and I got what I needed then. So, in the words of Patrick, I'm not crazy, I'm warm. I got what I needed now. I can move on. So I say, get me Armani. Get me the customer on the phone right now. We got it. We know exactly what we're looking for. We're going to run a sysdiagnose. It's going to be great. So we load up their sysdiagnose. I look specifically for that MA download options, and I can see highlighted there at the bottom, allows cellular equals 0, meaning, yep, that's what I'm looking for. It can't download it. And that's great. But then the customer points out to me, cool, but that's Apple's mobile asset daemon. What does the carrier care about that? They're just going to say, because they already had been getting the runaround from the carrier, they're just going to say, yeah, that's Apple, that's not us, it's not our problem, move on. So, we have this burden of proof. How are we going to prove that that's the case? So I did a little bit more digging while we were working with the customer with that log then, and I dug down and I found, oh, okay, there's actually a piece of logging information, I never knew about it previously, that's looking at the carrier software update download policy. So similar to how back in the olden times when you had APNs or things you'd put in when you get an unlocked phone with GSM, the carrier has a profile. Sometimes you'll see it where carrier settings requires an update when you put your new SIM card in or get a new phone or just at random. That has settings that come down from the carrier. It's not a mobile config or an MDM profile. It's just coming from the carrier. Well, that actually has information in it related to how they can use data, and then Apple interprets that within the software update services daemon. And that is actually being stored, and then the device knows these are the different settings for the carrier. And if I compare that between my logs and the customer's logs, I can see, hey, there's a pretty big difference here, which I'll make visible now. So for their carrier, and I'm sorry, I don't remember if it was Leica Mobile or Telia, but in Denmark, basically that update policy is saying, is the download free? Can you do whatever you want with this connection? No, it is not. Versus Tello, T-Mobile in the USA, is the download free? Yeah, you go at it. If you got enough data and you want to pay for that, or you have an unlimited plan, they'll probably throttle you. Download as much as you want. So right there, great, that's got the information that we need. We can maybe prove that to the carrier then for the customer or with the customer. A couple things of note that also are kind of interesting within this that I found funny is the maximum download size in bytes, which is 18,446 petabytes. I calculated it 3 times because I was like, that can't be right, but it is. Don't know who's downloading that. RIP, that cell phone tower. So another thing that I said, keep an eye on in the GUI to here, the very bottom line there, allow enhanced download on NR, which If you're familiar with our Lord and Savior, cellmapper.net, come to my Adigy booth if you want to talk about that for like 9 hours. I'll talk your head off. Love mapping cell phone towers. But NR equaling 5G, high data mode, yes. So if they're in an area with 5G, maybe that would change, but none of the areas that they were in had that, and the carrier did not wish to confirm that with them either. So the customer says, okay, great, I got all this. I'm gonna take it to the carrier. And after channeling a little bit of his inner Charlie to the carrier, he found out after a few levels of escalation with this data that their business plan wasn't actually a true unlimited plan. It was unlimited, but it didn't actually mean unlimited for all regions of where they were in Europe, because they're a multiple country company just based out of Denmark. So they had to pony up and get a better plan, and then they were able to do that then. So if we look at it from the perspective of what we were looking at, if you're trying to see how far down the on it you could get when presenting that case, our objective, it was to deploy iOS updates over cellular. What wasn't working? Well, any of it, deploying updates over cellular. The update was getting down to the device, but just not over cellular. We investigated the network in use, the declaration sent history, because from the MDM and DDM side of it, that's huge to know that, yep, it got there. We don't need to stop our investigation there, because I always try and take it like a row of dominoes or like a Rube Goldberg machine. You start from one point through to the finish there, and if I start with the declaration and that was never sent, well, let's look at that first. But obviously we could see it on device and those different components, but it's always good to check and see if that was structured any differently for some reason. Then we looked at the sysdiagnose output, finding out that known good example to compare it. And then we tried our known good Wi-Fi network, because yep, it worked every single time. Known good cellular network here in the US, and then the known bad, boom, compare them, we got it. So that was just kind of one use of it that I put together really quickly of this is how we find out what's actually wrong when there's no seeming error, nothing's going wrong, it just sits there until it hits a network. Or I'm also remembering there's another thing that he had tried. He swapped a different SIM card to a provider and it worked right away too. That should be on there. So that's a great example of when it's not working. But let's look at an example of something working. So let's say I got this really cool app and I want to burn it onto my iPhone with a DVD. And I want to have this managed app deployed to it. What does that actually look like? Because this is something that's entirely new. If you've looked at MDM apps before and volume purchase program of them being deployed, declarative doesn't look the same way. There's a few main differences. If you have the background of it, great. If you don't, here's an example for you to look at later. So when you first enroll a device with DDM, and this is a device that we enrolled in a test sandbox the other day, it's going to say, yep, I have this declarative management command from the MDM service. I got it. Yep, I finished running it. I know what I'm looking for. And then we'll see, again, that managed distribution daemon that we were looking at. What's the metadata of it? Lists out the UDID of the device, serial number of the device redacted. And then that last number there is something to pay attention to, because that ending in 613, if we look at the command history for the declaration going out, is actually the entity identifier of the application. So this is a little bit different than using the bundle identifiers of the past as you would with MDM. So this screenshot with the arrow there lined up for that device is pointing out that's the entity identifier. That's what we're looking for in the logs. So from a troubleshooting perspective, if you're just trying to figure it out as fast as possible on your first point of contact call, I would basically go and put that identifier in there, like how many things are going to match however many characters that is that I'm not going to count right now. If I put that in as an any file or any filter within my log file, I'll probably find something related to it, and I could then filter back from that. So it's about finding those little pieces to pick and pull at is really what it comes down to, and knowing what you could find that would be unique instead of just Googling app don't work. Why? You're going to get a lot of results. Google's pretty good, but it's not that good. So then from that point, if I pull that and strip that back in the log and I look at more components other than just that, I can see that the app subscriber process is out there. And then most importantly, that App Store daemon that I talked about a few slides ago. And it's going out and it's saying, I'm going to get Amazon, and then boom, at the very bottom there, it's saying, what is the item ID 5 lines from the bottom? ending in 613, that's the application going down. So that's great. That's 2 examples where you can kind of figure out what's going on from those logs. But sometimes you'll do that and figure that out, and there's really no way to fix it. You got to send feedback to Apple or to your MDM vendor. But more often than not, there might be something that no one has any power over other than the operating system. So if you're part of the public beta or Appleseed for EDU or IT, which if you are not, I highly suggest it because you get early access to that. It is a free program for Appleseed for EDU and IT. Or if you're part of the developer program, you get access to get the betas and the feedback app to send things specifically about those betas as you're testing or going through. And really what Apple is looking for, also related to if I had $1 for every time, if I had $1 for every time Apple asks, yeah, but what's the user story? I don't care what's not working, but tell me what the story around it is. Again, coming back to that objective. And then on top of that, what's the workflow details to replicate it so that they can have everything in a full story of that. You're also going to be taking that sysdiagnose and uploading it. So where is feedback.app? It's within core services applications, feedback assistance right there. If you go and say, I want to file a new feedback for MDM, it's going to ask you a few basic pieces of information. You're probably going to go and nuke your log because I cannot ever count. I can count on exactly 0 hands how many times I've uploaded a log from my actual device. It's always a test device or a end user device. So you're going to go dump that out and then take your log file and select that specifically. So last thing on this, one example of giving feedback, and I know this is really small, it'll be in the slide deck, but I'm just going to tell a story around it. We ran into an issue with the DDM updates where the enforcement kept prompting and kept prompting and kept prompting for the local user password. Even though the user was logged in, they had been logged in, I logged them out, logged them back in. At no point did we put the password in of what it was asking for because I kind of wanted to figure out why that was because it's not the expected behavior of it. So the TLDR is, I kind of said to Apple, I want to better understand how this prompt is working because on our devices that we have on 14.1.1 back when this was happening, the declaration enforcement going to 14.2 just keeps prompting. And then the funny thing is, let's say I set it for 3 days out at 6 p.m. and I leave the device and I don't touch it, it updated. I never gave it the password, so why does it need it? So to do that, I gave them kind of that story of just trying to understand why that is, and then the full steps of I took a fresh device, I had the enforcement set, I didn't put it in. When the end user was prompted, I took a screenshot. When the notification came up again, I took a screenshot. Both times labeling that screenshot with what was the component, like you'd see in the attachments below, and the timestamp, giving them that context of pretty much immediately when that happened, so it can be filtered out in the logs. Taking a sysdiagnose somewhere in the middle because I was monitoring that VARDB directory for persistent to know, is this going to roll over? Okay, I'll take one now, so they've got that example. Then take it again after that when it happens, and that might have rolled over. And then as the enforcement time got closer and closer, I also ensured that I was meeting all of the different requirements for battery power and network. So something that was talked about in an earlier session, and I heard straight from Apple last year when we were out there, if you have silicon, it's 20%, Intel, 50%. But I ensured that this device, which was an Intel device, I did one of Intel and silicon, both read 100%, plugged into power on a wired Ethernet connection that was not going to change at all. And of course, the device updated automatically without the password. So gave that information to Apple. They came back and said, you don't have a bootstrap token. I came back and said, I don't know, here's a screenshot of it. And long story short, that has now led to the resolution of this as a potential fix identified for a future update. We have seen it less and less, but it's not fully fixed. There might be a few other scenarios out there. But bottom line is telling that rich story and being able to engage with Apple. I mean, they replied pretty much immediately versus some of the feedbacks that I had worked with in my past jobs where we just say, this isn't working, or here's the log. It's just like, I'm not going to say impossible, but without that context, it's a lot more legwork to find out what's actually going on and when. So with that, thank you for your time. I'll open it to Q&A. All right, let's see if I can throw this thing. I'll do it down the aisle, though. Ooh.
You had the contains in one of the predicates. One was lowercase, the other was uppercase. Is there a specific reason why?
No, you can mix and match those.
Okay.
In a similar vein, when you're doing the searching by predicate or event message, how flexible is it for looking for like doing regex or even just
Yep.
like a wildcard, like com.apples asterisk?
You can do that. You need to change the, if you just Google or look at actually the man page for log, there's a whole component in the man page about how you change it for regex. Or if you want to mix case and sensitivity within a predicate, you can also have, I think it's bracket and then a C. And for the regex, there's an asterisk. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's an asterisk or something you apply when you're typing that out that basically allows it that you could say, I want to look for anything related to air, and then leave off the drop part of it, and it would filter down for that.
Okay. So is it similar? Is it similar to any other kind of formatting, like if you're doing a SQL statement or a grep or something like that? The construction of those, is it going to be similar search term construction?
Yeah, as long as you specify that it's not the exact thing you're looking for, it'll go through and find that within the binary then.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other? I mean, I know it's your nap hour. So any other questions? And it's the nice toasty hot room where I'm cooking up here, nice and nap ready. Cool. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.